The dust devil swirled past Clara Bennett's knees as she drove the small wooden stake into the ground that felt more like sun-baked clay than proper earth. Her calico dress, already stained with dirt, though the morning sun had barely cleared the horizon over the New Mexico territory. It was the summer of 1878, and the land outside Santa Fe stretched endlessly in shades of rust and gold, unforgiving and beautiful in equal measure. Clara's fingers ached as she pressed another seed into the shallow hole she had managed to scrape out with her father's old trowel. The metal edge had dulled from weeks of this same routine, and her palms bore fresh blisters that stung with each movement. She had buried her father 6 months ago, and her mother 3 years before that. The small plot of land they had claimed was all she had left in this world, and she would be damned if she let it defeat her. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, shielding her eyes against the glare. A rider approached from the east, his silhouette dark against the brightening sky. Clara's hand instinctively moved to the rifle she kept propped against the fence post, but she did not reach for it yet. Out here, you learned to read intention in the way a man sat his horse, and this rider moved with an easy confidence that spoke more of weariness than threat. He drew closer, and she could make out details. A black hat worn soft with age, a dusty coat that might have been brown once, and a face that carried the weathered look of someone who had spent more nights under stars than roofs. He was young, though, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that caught the morning light in a way that made them seem almost amber. The cowboy reined in his horse about 10 feet from where she knelt, and for a long moment, he simply looked at her, and then at the small stakes she had placed in careful rows across the barren ground. His gaze traveled over the empty water bucket, the pile of seeds wrapped in cloth, and the determined set of her jaw. "Morning, miss," he said finally, his voice carrying a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "Name's Jack Cordell. I am looking for work, and I heard in town there might be ranches hiring out this way." Clara straightened, brushing dirt from her hands, though it was a futile gesture. "You heard wrong. There are no ranches this direction for another 5 miles. The McCready spread is north, and they might have use for a hand." Jack nodded slowly, but he did not turn his horse. Instead, his eyes returned to her neat rows of stakes. "What are you planting?" "Corn, beans, squash," Clara replied, her voice carrying a defensive edge. "Why does it matter to you?" "It matters because I have never seen anyone try to grow anything in dirt this hard without water nearby," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. "The nearest creek is 2 miles west if I am reading the land right." "Then I will carry water 2 miles," Clara said firmly. "These seeds will grow because they have to. I will make them grow." Jack swung down from his horse and Clara tensed, but he made no move toward her. Instead, he walked to the edge of her planting area and crouched down, running his hand over the earth. He pulled off his glove and pressed his palm flat against the ground, as if he could read something in the feel of it. "This is alkali soil," he said quietly. "It will fight you every step of the way. Even if you carry water until your back breaks, these seeds are going to struggle." Clara felt something hot and angry rise in her chest. "I know what kind of soil it is. I know the odds. But this is what I have, and I will not give up on it. My father broke his back claiming this land, and I will see something grow on it before I let it go." Jack looked up at her then, and something shifted in his expression. The skepticism faded, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition, as if he had found something he had been searching for without knowing it. "If you believe they will grow, then I do," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and oddly weighted with meaning. Clara stared at him, searching for the joke or the pity, but found neither. His amber eyes held only honesty and something else she could not quite name. "Why would you say that?" she asked, her voice softer now. Jack stood, dusting off his hands. Because I have been riding for 3 months looking for something worth believing in, and I just watched you plant seeds in impossible ground like you could will them to life through sheer stubbornness. That is the kind of faith that changes things. Clara felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. She had been alone for so long, fighting this land with nothing but determination, and the dwindling supplies her father had left behind. The words of encouragement felt like water on parched earth. "I cannot pay you," she said abruptly. "If you are looking for work, I have nothing to offer." "I did not ask for pay," Jack replied. He glanced at the sun, then back at her. "That creek 2 miles west. There is a way to divert some of the water this direction. It would take work, digging an irrigation channel, but it could be done, if you had help." "Why would you help me?" Clara asked, suspicious despite the hope that flickered in her chest. Jack was quiet for a moment, then he smiled slightly. "Maybe I am tired of riding. Maybe I like the idea of making something grow in hard ground. Or maybe I just think anyone stubborn enough to try deserves someone equally stubborn to help them succeed." Clara looked at him, this stranger who had appeared out of the morning dust with his worn hat and his unexpected words, and made a decision that would change everything. "There is a lean-to behind the house. It is not much, but it is shelter. If you are serious about helping, you can stay there. But I warn you, this land will break your heart before it gives you anything." "Then I will be in good company," Jack said, and his smile reached his eyes. They worked through the morning, Clara finishing her planting while Jack surveyed the land, walking back and forth between her property and the direction of the creek. When the sun reached its zenith and the heat became brutal, Clara brought out water and cold beans left from the night before. They ate in the shade of the small adobe house, and Clara found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. "Where are you from?" she asked finally. "San Antonio originally," Jack replied. "My family had a small ranch there, lost it 5 years ago to drought and debt. I have been working cattle drives and odd jobs ever since, never staying anywhere too long." "Why not?" Clara asked. Jack was quiet, staring out at the shimmering heat waves that rose from the distant earth. "Because everywhere I went, I kept looking for something that felt like it mattered. Like it was mine to care about. After a while, I started to think maybe I was not built for settling. And now," Clara ventured, "now I am sitting in the shade of an adobe house with a woman who plants seeds in impossible ground," Jack said, turning to look at her directly. "And for the first time in 5 years, I am not thinking about the next place to ride to." The honesty in his voice made Clara's heart beat faster. She looked away, unsettled by the intensity of the moment. "We should get back to work before the day is gone." They fell into a routine over the following days. Jack took Clara's father's old shovel and began the back-breaking work of digging an irrigation channel from the creek. Clara continued to tend her seeds, carrying water in buckets while they waited for the channel to be completed. In the evenings, they would sit outside as the desert cooled, and they would talk. Clara learned that Jack had a younger sister in San Antonio who had married a shopkeeper, that he had once wanted to be a schoolteacher but circumstances had pushed him into cowboy work instead, that he could read and write better than most men she had met. Jack learned that Clara had grown up in Missouri, that her family had moved west chasing the promise of land and opportunity, that her mother had died of fever and her father of a heart that simply gave out after too much struggle. "Do you miss Missouri?" Jack asked one evening as the stars began to prick through the darkening sky. "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "I miss the green. The way things grew without you having to fight for every inch, but this is home now, this is what I have to make work." "It will work," Jack said with quiet confidence. "Another week and the channel will reach your land. Once we get water flowing steady, those seeds will have a real chance. Why do you believe in this so much?" Clara asked, turning to look at him in the gathering darkness. You saw how bad the soil is. You know the odds. Jack was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. My father used to say that faith is not about knowing something will work. It is about deciding it is worth trying anyway. When I saw you out there that first morning, on your knees in the dirt, planting those seeds like you could make the impossible happen through pure will, I saw someone who had more faith in her bones than I have had in years. That is worth believing in. Clara felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. I am glad you stopped that morning, she said quietly. So am I, Jack replied, and even in the darkness, she could hear the smile in his voice. The irrigation channel took 3 weeks to complete. Jack worked until his hands bled and his back screamed in protest, but he never complained. Clara helped when she could, though Jack tried to insist she focus on the other work the homestead required. They argued about it good-naturedly, and Clara won more often than not, showing up with her own shovel and a determined expression that made Jack laugh and shake his head. The day they opened the channel and watched water flow onto Clara's land, for the first time felt like witnessing a miracle. The parched earth drank it in greedily, and Clara stood watching with tears streaming down her face that she did not bother to hide. Jack stood beside her, filthy and exhausted and grinning like a fool. We did it, Clara whispered. You did it, Jack corrected. I just helped dig a ditch. Clara turned to him, impulsive and overwhelmed with emotion, and threw her arms around him. Jack caught her, surprised, and for a moment they simply stood there, holding each other while the water flowed and the desert began to soften around them. When Clara pulled back, her cheeks were flushed with more than just the heat. I am sorry, I did not mean to. Do not be sorry, Jack said, his hands still resting lightly on her arms. His amber eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Clara, these past weeks working beside you, I have not wanted to be anywhere else. I need you to know that. I know, Clara said softly, because I have felt the same way. Jack's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a lingering tear. I came here looking for work and found something worth staying for, found someone worth staying for. When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, giving her room to pull away. But Clara did not pull away. She leaned into him, into the kiss, into the promise of something she had not dared to hope for. The desert stretched around them, vast and unforgiving, but in that moment, it felt like the whole world had softened into something beautiful. The seeds began to sprout 2 weeks later. Clara discovered the first green shoots one morning and called for Jack so loudly he came running from the barn, thinking something was wrong. When he saw her crouched by the tiny plants, laughing and crying at once, he swept her up and spun her around, both of them giddy with success. The plants grew slowly but steadily. The corn stalks reached toward the relentless sun, the bean vines began to climb the supports Jack had built, and the squash plants spread their broad leaves across the ground. It was not a large garden, but it was thriving, and every green leaf felt like a victory against impossible odds. Jack had long since moved out of the lean-to and into the house. They had not discussed it formally, it simply happened naturally over time. First, he would come in for meals. Then Clara insisted he should not walk back out to the lean-to in the dark. Then one night he simply stayed, sleeping on the floor by the fire while Clara took the small bed. Eventually, after they had kissed under the stars for the 3rd or 4th time, Clara told him the floor was foolish when the bed was big enough for 2. They were careful with propriety as much as possible, but in the isolated homestead with no neighbors for miles, they also allowed themselves the freedom to build something real without the constant scrutiny of a town. Jack was unfailingly respectful, and Clara had never felt safer or more cherished than she did in his presence. As summer deepened, they talked about the future. Jack wanted to expand the garden next year, maybe try wheat. Clara dreamed of chickens and perhaps a milk cow. They spoke carefully around the bigger questions until one evening in late August, when Jack could not hold it in any longer. "Marry me," he said abruptly as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara turned to him, her heart hammering. "What?" Jack took her hand, his expression serious. "Marry me, Clara. I know we have not known each other long by some measures, but I have never been more certain of anything. You are the strongest, most determined, most beautiful woman I have ever met. You took impossible ground and made it bloom. You took a drifting cowboy and gave him a reason to put down roots. I love you. I want to build a life here with you, a real life. Say yes." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, Jack, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I started loving you the moment you looked at my impossible garden and said you believed in it." Jack kissed her then, deep and passionate, pulling her close as the desert cooled around them and the first stars began to appear. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "We should go into Santa Fe soon," he said. "Make it official. Maybe see if there is a preacher available." "Soon," Clara agreed. "But not yet. I want to bring the first harvest in first. I want to marry you with proof that impossible things can happen when you believe in them enough." Jack laughed, the sound full of joy. "You want to marry me with vegetables?" "I want to marry you with hope," Clara corrected, smiling. "The vegetables are just evidence." They rode into Santa Fe in early September with a wagon full of corn, beans, and squash. The harvest had exceeded even Clara's hopeful expectations, and they sold most of it at the market, keeping only what they needed for themselves and for seed. With the money, they bought supplies for the winter and paid the fee for a marriage license. The preacher was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who asked them no difficult questions, and seemed genuinely pleased by their obvious devotion to each other. They were married in the small church at sunset, with only the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Clara wore the one good dress she owned, a deep blue calico that had been her mother's, and Jack had cleaned up until he was almost unrecognizable, his hair neatly trimmed and his face shaved smooth. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed Clara with such tenderness that the preacher's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. They spent their wedding night in a small hotel in Santa Fe, a luxury they rarely allowed themselves, and made love for the first time with the gentleness and passion of two people who had found something precious and were determined to cherish it. The next morning, they loaded up the wagon and headed home to their homestead. The ride was quiet but comfortable, their hands linked whenever Jack was not holding the reins. Clara kept glancing at the simple gold band on her finger, a wonder blooming in her chest that this was real, that she was married to this good man who had appeared out of the dust and stayed to help her build something beautiful. That winter was hard, as all desert winters were, but they faced it together. They added a proper bedroom to the house and improved the barn. Jack took odd jobs with neighboring ranches when they needed extra hands, bringing in additional income. Clara planned the next year's planting, dreaming bigger now that they knew the irrigation system worked. In the spring, they planted twice as much land. Jack built better fencing to protect against rabbits and other pests. They bought 3 chickens from a neighbor, and Clara started a small herb garden near the house. The work was still backbreaking and the land still fought them, but together they were stronger than the challenges they faced. By the time summer arrived, Clara knew she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Jack. When she finally shared the news one evening, Jack's face went through a series of expressions so rapidly she almost laughed. Shock, joy, fear, and then fierce protectiveness all flickered across his features before he pulled her into his arms and held her as if she were made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he said against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "We are," Clara confirmed, smiling against his chest. "Sometime in late winter, I think." Jack pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified and thrilled and so happy I could burst," Clara said honestly. "Are you?" "Same," Jack said, and then he laughed, the sound bright and unrestrained. "We are going to be parents. God help that child having two stubborn people like us raising it." "That child will be strong and determined and know how to make things grow in hard ground," Clara said firmly. "That child will be loved beyond measure." Jack kissed her then, soft and reverent. "Yes, he or she will be." The pregnancy progressed well, though Clara worked longer than Jack wanted her to. They argued about it frequently, with Clara insisting she was not made of porcelain and Jack insisting she should not be hauling water or digging in the garden. They compromised, with Clara doing lighter tasks and Jack taking on the heavier work. In October, Jack's sister Mary arrived with her husband Thomas for a visit. Mary was a petite woman with Jack's same amber eyes, and she took to Clara immediately. The two women became fast friends, spending hours talking while the men worked on expanding the house to make room for the coming baby. "You have made my brother happier than I have ever seen him," Mary told Clara one afternoon as they shelled beans together on the porch. "When he wrote to me about you, his letter practically glowed. He said you were the strongest woman he had ever met and that he had finally found where he belonged." Clara felt her eyes water, her emotions close to the surface these days. "He saved me," she said quietly. "I was so alone, trying to make this impossible dream work, and he just appeared and believed in me. I do not know what would have happened if he had ridden past that morning. He would have circled back," Mary said with certainty. "Jack has been looking for you his whole life, even before he knew you existed. He just needed to find you." When Mary and Thomas left a week later, Clara felt the loss of female companionship acutely. But Mary promised to return in the spring to meet the new baby, and she kept her word. Clara went into labor on a bitterly cold night in late February. Jack rode like a demon to fetch the midwife from the nearest homestead, and the older woman arrived in time to help bring the baby into the world. It was a long labor, and there were moments when Jack feared he might lose his mind from worry, pacing outside the bedroom while the midwife and Clara worked. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, Jack nearly fell to his knees in relief. The midwife opened the door, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Cordell, a healthy, loud son. And your wife did beautifully." Jack pushed into the room and went straight to Clara, who was exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was wailing his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. "Clara," Jack breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, "you are incredible." "Is he really all right? Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Clara assured him, smiling tiredly. "Do you want to hold your son?" Jack took the baby with shaking hands, cradling him against his chest. The infant quieted almost immediately, and Jack stared down at the tiny face with an expression of such pure wonder that Clara felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks. "He is perfect," Jack whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Clara looked at Jack holding their son, this cowboy who had believed in her impossible dream and knew exactly what the name should be. "Samuel," she said, "after my father." "Samuel Joseph, if you like the sound of it." Jack looked up, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Samuel Joseph Cordell, it is a good, strong name." He leaned over carefully to kiss Clara's forehead. "Thank you for him, for everything, for letting me stay that first morning." "Thank you for stopping," Clara replied, for seeing something worth believing in. Samuel was a healthy baby who quickly established that he had inherited his parents' strong will. He nursed well and grew steadily, and both Jack and Clara fell completely in love with every tiny expression and sound he made. Jack was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy at night, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with endless fascination. Spring came again, and with it, Mary and Thomas returned as promised, this time bringing Mary's infant daughter to meet her cousin. The two families spent a joyful week together, and Clara reveled in having another woman to share the experiences of new motherhood with. As the years passed, the homestead continued to thrive. Jack and Clara expanded their planting each year, added a proper barn and more livestock. They had a second child 3 years after Samuel, a daughter they named Emma Rose. She had Clara's blonde hair and Jack's amber eyes, and her older brother adored her from the first moment he met her. The garden that had started as Clara's impossible dream grew into a thriving farm. The irrigation channel Jack had dug was expanded and improved. Other homesteaders in the area began coming to Jack for advice on water management, and he found himself with a reputation as someone who could read the land and find solutions. Clara started teaching Samuel and eventually Emma their letters and numbers, using the few books they owned and making up lessons when books were not available. Jack joined in the evenings, and their small adobe house was often filled with the sound of learning and laughter. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack took Clara back out to the field where he had first found her planting seeds. It was now lush and productive, barely recognizable as the hard-packed alkali earth it had once been. They stood together, watching their children play among the corn stalks, and Jack wrapped his arm around Clara's waist. "Do you remember what I said that first morning?" he asked. "If I believe they will grow, then you do," Clara quoted softly. "How could I forget? It was the moment everything changed." "I meant it," Jack said. "I took one look at you fighting that hard ground with nothing but faith and determination, and I knew I had found something real, someone real. I would make that same choice 1,000 times over." Clara leaned into him, her heart full. "We made them grow, not just the seeds, but all of this. A family, a home, a life. We took hard ground and made it bloom." "We did," Jack agreed. "And I fall more in love with you every day." They stood there as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their children's laughter carrying on the desert breeze. The land that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving now felt like home. Warm and welcoming and full of life, they had coaxed from unwilling soil through sheer belief and backbreaking work. Samuel came running up, 7 years old now and tall for his age. "Papa, can we have a story tonight about when you and Mama first met?" "He always wants that story," Emma chimed in, toddling over with her chubby 4-year-old legs. "I want the one about the talking coyote." Jack laughed and scooped Emma up while ruffling Samuel's hair. "We can have both stories. But first, let us get these vegetables picked and get your mother inside before she works herself too hard again." Clara swatted at him playfully. "I am not working too hard. I am simply making sure everything is properly tended." "Stubborn as the day I met you," Jack teased, his eyes full of affection. "You would not have me any other way," Clara retorted. "Not for all the world," Jack confirmed. They walked back to the house together as a family, the setting sun casting long shadows across the thriving farm. That night, after the children were fed and bathed and tucked into their beds, Jack told them about the morning he had been riding through looking for work and found their mother on her knees in impossible dirt, planting seeds that should never grow. "Your mama looked up at me with the most determined expression I had ever seen," Jack said, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence the children loved. "And she told me those seeds would grow because they had to, She believed in them so much that I could not help but believe too. And they did grow, Samuel asked, even though he knew the answer. They did, Jack confirmed. Because your mother has more faith and stubbornness in her little finger than most people have in their whole bodies. She teaches all of us what it means to believe in something enough to make it real. Clara, listening from the doorway, felt her heart swell. She caught Jack's eye, and he smiled at her with such love that it still took her breath away after all these years. After the children finally fell asleep, Jack and Clara sat outside as they often did, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. The night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the moon. "Do you ever think about where you would be if you had not stopped that morning?" Clara asked quietly. Jack considered the question seriously. "Probably still drifting," he said finally, "still looking for something I could not name. I might have found work somewhere, maybe even decent work, but I would not have found home. I would not have found you." "I think about it sometimes," Clara admitted. "How close I came to losing this place, how alone I was, and then you appeared like something out of a prayer I had not known I was saying." Jack took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We were both looking for something without knowing it. You needed someone who would believe in your dreams, and I needed dreams worth believing in. We found each other at exactly the right moment." "Fate?" Clara asked. "Faith," Jack corrected. "Your faith in impossible things growing in hard ground, my faith that someone like you was worth staying for. Faith that together we could build something lasting." Clara turned to him, studying his face in the starlight. He had a few more lines around his eyes now, and there were threads of silver starting in his dark hair, but to her, he was just as handsome as the dusty cowboy who had ridden up that first morning. "I love you," she said simply, "more than I have words for." "I love you too," Jack replied, pulling her close. "You and those two sleeping miracles in there, you are my whole world. My hard-won, impossible, beautiful world." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Inside, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the farm they had built through determination and mutual faith stretched out into the darkness. The corn stalks rustled gently in the breeze, the bean vines climbed their supports, and the squash plants spread their leaves wide, all growing strong in ground that had once seemed too hard for anything to take root. It had been 12 years since that morning when Jack Cordell had ridden up to find Clara Bennett planting seeds in impossible dirt. 12 years since he had spoken the words that would change both their lives. "If you believe they will grow, then I do." Those words had been more than just encouragement for a struggling garden. They had been a promise, a commitment, a declaration of faith not just in seeds but in Clara herself, in the possibility of a future neither of them had dared to dream, and everything had grown. The seeds had become plants, the plants had become harvests, the harvests had become a thriving farm. The tentative connection between a lonely woman and a drifting cowboy had become love, had become marriage, had become a family. Two people who had been alone had become a partnership so strong that even the harsh desert ground had no choice but to yield to their combined determination. As they finally went inside for the night, checking on their sleeping children one more time before retiring to their own room, Clara thought about faith and belief and the power of someone saying they believed in you when you needed it most. She thought about hard ground made soft through persistent care. She thought about seeds that should never have sprouted becoming strong plants that fed a family and gave them purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked softly as they settled into bed, his arm coming around her waist to pull her close. "About believing," Clara said. "About how you believed in me and my impossible garden before you even knew my name." "It was never impossible," Jack murmured against her hair. It just needed the right person stubborn enough to make it happen, and maybe it needed someone equally stubborn to help. Clara smiled in the darkness. We are quite a pair. The best pair, Jack agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They fell asleep as they often did, wrapped around each other, the sounds of their peaceful homestead surrounding them. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The irrigation channel Jack had dug all those years ago continued its steady flow, bringing life to ground that had once been barren. And in the fields, plants grew strong and green, testament to what could happen when faith met determination and two lonely people found each other at exactly the right moment. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of farm life. Seasons turned, crops were planted and harvested, children grew taller and more capable. Samuel became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working the land with his father, and showed an aptitude for understanding water and soil that made Jack proud. Emma was bright and curious, following her mother everywhere and asking endless questions about everything she encountered. When Samuel was 11 and Emma was 8, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more simple joy. They had done this before, knew what to expect, and their older children were excited about the prospect of a new baby. Jack was just as protective and attentive as he had been during Clara's first pregnancy, perhaps even more so now that he understood just how much could go wrong. But Clara was healthy and strong from years of farm work, and the pregnancy progressed smoothly. Their third child, another son they named Daniel, was born on a warm spring morning with much less drama than Samuel's difficult winter birth. Samuel and Emma were allowed to meet their baby brother almost immediately, and both were entranced by the tiny person who had joined their family. "He is so small," Emma whispered in awe, gently touching Daniel's tiny fist. "You were that small once," Clara told her with a smile. "Both you and Samuel. Will he be able to play with us?" Samuel asked practically. "Not for a while," Jack said, his hand resting on Samuel's shoulder. "But when he is bigger, you will teach him everything you know. How to tend the plants, how to care for the animals, how to read the land. You will be his big brother, and he will look up to you." Samuel nodded seriously, understanding the weight of responsibility being placed on him and clearly pleased by it. The family of 5 settled into new routines. Emma proved to be a natural with her baby brother, often helping Clara with Daniel's care. Samuel took on more responsibilities around the farm, working side by side with Jack and learning everything his father could teach him about coaxing life from reluctant ground. One evening when Daniel was about 6 months old, Jack and Clara sat on their porch watching the sunset while the children played nearby. Daniel was on Clara's lap, chewing contentedly on a wooden toy Jack had carved, while Samuel and Emma chased each other between the corn rows, their laughter carrying clearly in the still air. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," Jack said quietly. "A family, land that belongs to us, work that matters. Some mornings I wake up and cannot quite believe it is real." "It is real," Clara assured him, reaching over to take his hand. "We made it real, with hard work and faith and stubborn refusal to give up when things got difficult." "Mostly your stubborn refusal," Jack said with a grin. "I just followed your lead," Clara laughed. "We both know that is not true. You worked just as hard as I did to make this place thrive. You dug that irrigation channel with your own 2 hands. You built fences and barns and expanded the house. You believed in my impossible dream and helped make it reality." "It was never impossible," Jack said, echoing words he had spoken years before. "Just difficult. And anything difficult is worth doing if it is worth having." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the golden evening light. The farm stretched around them, abundant and thriving, so different from the barren plot Clara had been struggling with the morning Jack had ridden into her life. As Daniel grew from a baby into a toddler and then into a rambunctious little boy, the homestead continued to prosper. Jack's reputation for understanding water management had spread, and he occasionally consulted for other farmers in the region, bringing in additional income that allowed them to make improvements they had only dreamed of before. They bought a proper wagon, added a milk cow to their livestock, and expanded the house again to give each child their own small room. Clara started keeping a journal, writing down the stories of their life together so their children and eventual grandchildren would know how everything had begun. She wrote about the morning Jack had appeared out of the dust and said the words that would change her life. She wrote about the first green shoots pushing through hard ground, about their wedding in Santa Fe, about each child's birth and the 1,000 small moments that made up a life well lived. Samuel grew into a young man who looked remarkably like his father, tall and lean with the same amber eyes and easy way of moving. He was courted by several young women from neighboring homesteads, but he took his time, serious about choosing a partner the way his father had taught him to be serious about all important decisions. Emma became a talented artist, drawing pictures of the farm and the desert landscape with charcoal and pencils Jack bought for her in Santa Fe. She also inherited her mother's determination and her father's practicality, a combination that made her formidable despite her gentle appearance. Daniel, the youngest, was the most outgoing of the 3 children, quick to laugh and always ready for adventure. He adored both his older siblings and followed them around constantly, soaking up everything they could teach him. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised Clara by taking her back to Santa Fe, leaving the children in the capable care of Samuel, who at 18 was more than ready for the responsibility. They stayed in the same small hotel where they had spent their wedding night, and Jack presented Clara with a beautiful silver necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in town. 20 years, Clara said wonderingly, fingering the delicate chain. It feels like a lifetime and like no time at all. The best 20 years of my life, Jack said firmly. Every single day with you has been a gift. They made love that night with the passion and tenderness of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies and hearts completely. Afterward, lying tangled together in the hotel bed, Clara traced the lines on Jack's face with gentle fingers. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Stopping that morning. Staying when you could have kept riding." Jack caught her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her palm. "Never, not once, not for a single moment. You are the best decision I ever made, Clara Cordell, you and our children and this life we built together. Even when I am stubborn and difficult," Clara teased. "Especially then," Jack said with a grin. "Your stubborn determination is what makes everything possible. I would not change a single thing about you." They returned home the next day to find everything running smoothly, and their children proud of how well they had managed in their parents' absence. Life continued its steady pace, full of work and love and the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. When Samuel was 20, he married a young woman named Rebecca from a neighboring homestead. She was smart and kind and hard-working, and she fit into the family as if she had always been there. Jack and Clara added another room onto the house for the newlyweds, and Rebecca proved to be a blessing, helping with the farm work and becoming close friends with Emma. A year later, Samuel and Rebecca had their first child, a daughter they named Clara. Holding her tiny granddaughter for the first time, Clara Bennett Cordell felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that took her breath away. This was what she had been fighting for all those years ago when she planted seeds in impossible ground. Not just crops, but family, continuity, legacy. Jack stood beside her, looking down at his granddaughter with the same expression of wonder he had worn when holding each of their own children for the first time. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is," Clara agreed. Another impossible thing growing from hard ground. As the years accumulated, the homestead became a true family compound. Emma eventually married a kind schoolteacher who had moved to the area, and they built a small house on the edge of the property. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, spent a few years working cattle drives and exploring, but he always came home, and when he was 25, he returned for good with plans to start raising horses on a portion of the family land. Jack and Clara grew older gracefully, their hair silvering and their bodies bearing the marks of hard work, but their love for each other never dimmed. They still sat on their porch most evenings, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing, their hands linked and their hearts full. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration. The whole family gathered, along with neighbors and friends from surrounding homesteads. There was music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Jack stood and raised his glass. 30 years ago, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the warm evening air, I was a drifting cowboy with no particular direction and no real purpose. Then one morning I rode up on a woman planting seeds in ground so hard it should have been impossible to grow anything. But she believed those seeds would grow, and her faith was so strong that I could not help but believe too. That woman became my wife, the mother of my children, and the center of my entire world. Clara, everything good in my life started the moment you looked up from that hard dirt and let me stay. Clara felt tears streaming down her face as their family and friends applauded. Jack came to her and pulled her to her feet, kissing her gently while their grandchildren cheered. I love you, Clara said when they finally pulled apart. More than ever. More than I thought possible. I love you too, Jack replied, my impossible dream. They danced together as the stars emerged overhead, moving slowly to music played by Emma's husband on his fiddle. Around them, their children and grandchildren laughed and celebrated, the fruit of faith and hard work and two people who had believed in each other when belief seemed like the hardest thing in the world. The farm continued to thrive under the care of multiple generations. The irrigation system Jack had built was maintained and improved by Samuel and Daniel. The fields that Clara had first planted produced abundantly year after year. And the hard ground that had once seemed so impossible to work had become soft and fertile, giving back generously to those who tended it with care. Jack and Clara grew into old age together, still partners in everything, still best friends and passionate lovers even as their bodies slowed. They watched their grandchildren grow and eventually welcomed great-grandchildren. The small adobe house had expanded over the decades into a sprawling family home surrounded by other buildings and gardens. On a warm evening in late spring when Jack was 68 and Clara was 65, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the sound of children playing carried from somewhere nearby. Jack held Clara's hand, his thumb rubbing gently over her knuckles in a gesture so familiar it was unconscious. Do you remember what you said to me that first morning? Clara asked, even though she knew he remembered as well as she did. If you believe they will grow, then I do, Jack quoted softly. How could I forget? It was the moment my real life began. Mine too, Clara said. Everything good came from that moment, from you believing in me and my impossible dream. It was never impossible, Jack said, as he had said so many times over the years. It just needed faith and hard work and two stubborn people who refused to give up. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. We did good, did we not? We made something beautiful. We made something extraordinary, Jack corrected. We took hard ground and made it bloom. We built a family and a legacy. We loved each other through everything, and we never stopped believing. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. The farm was quiet now, settling into evening rest. In the fields, plants grew strong and healthy. In the houses scattered across the property, their descendants slept peacefully. And on the porch of the original adobe house, two people who had found each other in the dust and heat of a New Mexico morning sat hand in hand, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. Years later, when Jack and Clara were both gone, their great-grandchildren would still work the same land. They would tell stories about the stubborn woman who planted seeds in impossible ground and the cowboy who stopped to help her because he believed in her faith. They would point to the original irrigation channel, carefully maintained over generations, and talk about how their great-grandfather had dug it by hand with nothing but a shovel and determination. But that was all in the future. On this evening, Jack and Clara were simply two people who had loved well and worked hard and built something lasting. They were living proof that faith could move mountains, or at least make things grow in the hardest ground. They were testament to the power of believing in someone when they needed it most, and never giving up on the dreams that mattered. As they finally went inside for the night, Jack pulled Clara close and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Clara asked. "For letting me stay that morning," Jack said. "For believing that impossible things could happen, for building this life with me, for everything." Clara smiled and reached up to cup his weathered cheek. "Thank you for stopping. For believing in me. For being my partner in all things, for loving me so well." They went to bed wrapped in each other's arms as they had done for more than 40 years, their hearts full and their souls at peace. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. And in the fields around the homestead, plants grew strong in ground that had once been too hard for anything to take root, thriving because two people had believed they could and had worked together to make the impossible real. The story that had begun with a dusty cowboy riding up to a lonely woman planting seeds had become a legend of faith, determination, and love that would be passed down through generations. Jack and Clara Cordell had taken hard ground and made it bloom, and in doing so, they had created something that would last long after they were gone. A family rooted in the belief that impossible dreams were simply dreams that had not happened yet, waiting for the right people stubborn enough to make them real.